Welcome back. Around 58 people are murdered in South Africa every day. Nearly 144 are victims of sexual offences, including rape, on a daily basis. But the number of cash and transit heists is down by 23%. The 2018-2019 crime statistics were revealed in Parliament today. Gareth Newham is the head of the Justice and Violence Prevention Cluster at the Institute for Security Studies. He joins us now. Gareth, hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Good evening, actually. You predicted this morning that certain trends would show that violent crime would be up. Have any of the, and particularly around contact crimes, have any of the numbers released today surprised you?
Not really. The two crime categories that we pay particular attention to because of their reliability and what they tell us about policing, one is the murder rate. So that is our most reliable category of crime, and we have seen year-on-year increases since 2012. So this is the 7th year now that we've seen an increase. And of course, the factors that drive murder in South Africa haven't really changed over that period, so we weren't really expecting to see a decrease. The only really good news is that the rate of increase has slowed down. So we had a 6.9% increase in the previous 2 years, and now we've seen the rate to slow down to a 3.4% increase. But that's still almost 700 more murders than last year, and it's about 5,400 murders than we had in 2012. So it's not good news. Aggravated robbery, very important to watch because that is a crime that really drives a lot of the fear in South Africa. Aggravated robbery means that an individual or group of usually young men armed with knives or firearms hold you up on the street and use or threaten force against you to steal from you. We have various subcategories such as car hijacking, truck hijacking, cash in transit heists, and of course the robberies of people in their homes and small businesses drive a lot of fear. Those crimes are very policeable. So an effective use of policing resources can really reduce those crimes very quickly. And so that we've seen another 7-year trend of the increase in aggravated robbery shows that the policing strategies aren't being, or there's not an effective use of existing resources. The good news there is that most of the subcategories have reduced. So your cash in transit heists, your bank robberies, your truck hijackings and carjackings, business robberies have all gone down slightly. House robberies, slight increase, but the overall increase has been driven by street robberies, and that's an area that is still a blind spot to the South African Police Service, unfortunately.
Okay, it can be important to get the number analysis right here. I'm not a data analyst, you sort of are. So the number of murders every year has gone up, for example, if we just take that figure. The number of South Africans, though, the population has also gone up. We can say with absolute clarity and confidence that the murder rate per 100,000 people has gone up. Would that be right?
Yes, it has gone up. It's gone up by, what we're looking at is about 1.5%, 1.4%. So if you look at it since the increase, the rate of murder has now over 21% increase since 2012. And the numbers of murders is up 35%. So both the rate and numbers have gone up.
Okay, the numbers also seem to show the vast majority of murders happens, I mean, it's Friday and Saturday night, right? People, and I mean, this leads immediately to questions around alcohol and drugs. It also leads to questions about whether those crimes are policeable, if police would really be able to stop, you know, two people having an argument while inebriated and then getting into a fight that proves fatal.
That's a very valid point. The police can reduce murders that are associated with things like robberies, vigilante action, taxi violence, where there's very clear groups of protagonists that are going to cause or repeatedly involved in violence. But when it comes to what drives most of the murders in South Africa, about 60%, where, as you said, mostly young men getting into an argument, often while drinking, half of these murders take place on Friday and Saturday nights after 9 o'clock in the evening. It's very difficult for the police to prevent that. The best they could do is identify hotspots, in other words, areas where these are taking place, particularly if they're in public spaces like taverns or bars, and make sure that they have police presence, which will sometimes dampen people's behavior. But more than reacting to it, there's not much they can really do, and we need to see other interventions that could be put to play in areas where there's high levels of this kind of violence.
I mean, it'd be tempting to say that you should just put a police officer at each tavern. Someone will just open another tavern that the police won't know about.
Well, of course, a lot of these murders take place in private areas or not necessarily in taverns. People might get into an argument in a tavern, go outside, go into a nearby area, and then that's where the fight might break out. So, yes, it's not something that the police have completely in their control. But we do know a lot about these murders. You know, so we know that they're largely young men, typically under the age of 30. There are literally, 149 precincts out of the 1,150 precincts, so 13%, where half of all murders in South Africa are recorded. they're not recorded, those murders don't take place randomly throughout those precincts either. There's very clear hotspots. And we know it's about how generally young men see themselves and others. So you don't back down, you use violence to sort out a problem or conflict. And that is something that you can start reducing through interventions from childhood. And the science internationally shows that that's probably the most effective way to reduce that kind of behavior. But you start young, and you run programs at school, and then within 10 years you'll see a big reduction. But ideally we start this today, because 10 years ago, had we done this, we probably would see a different result than what we're seeing today.
Something you could do is ban alcohol. I mean, it's been tried in societies. It's failed, I think, almost everywhere it's been tried. But if you removed alcohol from the equation, it would probably make a big difference for a couple of weeks.
There's a very strong link between alcohol consumption and violent behavior. People lose their inhibitions. If they already believe violence is an appropriate way to respond to conflicts or disagreements, they're more likely to use violence while under the influence of alcohol. So one thing is banning alcohol is quite extreme, and you then end up having organized crime problems. But you could do a lot to educate and to deal with young people, particularly young teenagers and adults, around the dangers of drinking alcohol. There's been really fascinating work done in places like Colombia, the city of Bogota, where the schools introduced a how to drink alcohol program. Caused outrage at first. People thought that, like we think about sex education, you're teaching people that you should drink. It wasn't about that. It was teaching people about the dangers of alcohol, how to recognize when you had too much, and how to engage with other people who are drunk so that you keep yourself safe and you keep them safe. And it had measurable reductions in violence associated with alcohol consumption in that area.
And you can do that as a school function rather than, because we understand about problems with the family unit in South Africa and male violence at home. You're saying that could actually just be done through the schools? Could
be done through the schools, and this is often where you're probably more likely to get receptive audiences, and should be done through the schools.
There's been a significant decline in cash and transit heists, 23% it's down by. I mean, that shows the value of a breakthrough when you have organised players involved.
Absolutely. That shows that the police initiatives to set up specific detective task teams, cluster their functional intelligence onto the networks involved in these kinds of crimes has been very successful. So we know that when the police are using the resources effectively and it's intelligence driven, they can have quite substantial reductions. In 1 year we've seen a double-digit reduction. So that's a very positive sign. The thing is that it's very specific kinds of crimes. Most people are not going to be affected by cash and transit heists.
Okay, it does talk about police crime intelligence, though. It does talk about how important that can be. You've been quite critical in the past of the failures of police crime intelligence.
Well, we are currently spending over 3 billion rand a year on 9,000 crime intelligence officers. So we should be receiving a lot better targeted policing than we have received. But we know the reason for this has largely been the destruction of crime intelligence during the state capture years, because the state crime intelligence resources were politicized and used largely for political reasons and not for reducing organized crime and keeping the people safe. This was because the police is a very nationally driven organization, this dysfunction was really affected at the national level, so you have pockets of excellence. But people at provincial and station levels weren't given the proper direction, guidance, resources, training, and being held accountable. And so that structure, that function became highly dysfunctional and deteriorated. We do have a new head of crime intelligence, Lieutenant General Peter Jacobs. He's been in the post for about a year now. But he's got a huge job cut out for him, because it's not only about rebuilding, which is very difficult. Most of policing functions like intelligence and investigations actually requires on-the-job experience. You can get trained to a point, but it's really about being in the field, developing networks, practicing that craft over time to really get to a level where you can use it effectively, and that was decimated over time.
Okay, the immediate response, we live in a democracy, which means people are immediately going to demand of the police that there be more police. There's been if I understand the numbers correctly, quite a big increase in the number of police officers over the last 10 years or so. I think more are in the pipeline, if I remember correctly. I think the National Police Commissioner suggested maybe another 7,000 will come. Is that the right response? I mean, visible policing does seem to work.
Well, it can to a point. There's a sort of threshold where more police doesn't really make much of a difference. And there are debates about whether we've reached that threshold. You know, literally between 2002 and 2012, the size of the South African Police Service grew from 132,000 people to almost just under 200,000 people. It's actually, since 2012, it's reduced to about 193,000. Most of the losses have been in the administrative functions, not actually the armed, trained officers. But that's why intelligence is so important. The police don't have to police all 58 million people estimated to be in the country at the moment. They have to police those individuals that are involved in particular forms of repeat violent offending, such as those committing robberies. And the organised or the repeat offenders follow certain patterns and trends. They have to, typically if they're committing robberies, come in contact with people. They have to sell the goods into networks. So once you've identified those networks and those individuals, that's why you've seen in various countries sometimes robbery being reduced within 3 to 5 years by 75%.
Sure.
The Gauteng police in 2009 to 2011, 2 years reduced car hijacking by 32%, business and house robberies by 20 and 19%. So it is possible with good intelligence to make quite big reductions in those kinds of crimes. And that's why it's such an important function in the police.
Gareth Newham, thank you very much indeed. Really do appreciate it. Gareth Newham's the head of the Justice and Violence Prevention Cluster at the Institute of Security Studies.